many of the hadiths also contain this kind of scientific information or knowledge that could not be known at that time to the Prophet. And so this is another indication that the source of this knowledge is God himself. And so there is this international commission which has existed now for something like 30 years or more, which organizes conferences, international conferences. I have stopped, listing the conferences that have been organized from East Asia to Brazil, publishes books and has a huge website and different languages and so on and so forth. And then there are Islamic personalities that are every year, COVID notwithstanding, but usually every year there is one Islamic personality that is chosen in the world and is given this big prize to sort of highlight and underscore the work of this person. And 2 years in recent times, 2006 and 2013, this Islamic Personality of the Year award was given to people who spend their life doing this scientific i'jaz ilmi. So among the incredible claims that the speed of light can be calculated just by combining a couple of Quranic verses, the ages of the earth and the universe can be calculated by combining a couple of verses, the subatomic world, meaning nuclei and protons and neutrons and stuff like that, genetic code, the grand unified theory, the telephone, fax, email, radio, TV, laser, pulsars, black holes, all of that can be found in the Quran if you know how to read the verses with the proper eye. So that's the claim. And of course, I've written pages and pages rebutting all of this, including a chapter in my book. Speaking of my book, so this is Islam's Quantum Question, which was written now a little bit more than 10 years ago and was translated, was well received, very happy. I didn't imagine that it would have such an impact at the academic and scholarly level. I really meant it sort of more general to people who are interested in these issues of Islam and science. So I reviewed all of these topics at length, including a whole chapter on cosmology, a whole chapter on evolution, a whole chapter on this i'jaz that I talked about, where I went after it, sort of systematically, the principles of i'jaz, the examples of i'jaz, the methodology of i'jaz, and so on and so forth, all of that. Anyway, so what's my proposition? So instead of just, criticizing and saying, here's what Sardar said or Nasser said, and why this is problematic. So I reviewed all of them in lots of detail. If you're interested in any of the topics that I mentioned earlier, on each one of them, you'll find minimum 10, 20 pages. But at the same time, of course, I was trying to promote some ideas, some views. So how do I approach Islam and science? And my first principle is we need to adopt modern science in all its rigorous methodology and results. Why? Because it is universal. Why is it universal? Because it requires falsifiability and repeatability. So it is not because somebody in Europe or in Canada who happens to be an unbeliever or believer or whatever has come up with a new theory. It really doesn't matter who came up with the theory or who came up with any measurement or any result or whatever. If it has been repeated and confirmed by people elsewhere in different places with different instruments, with different minds, different times, etc., then that result becomes true in the truth meaning of the word. And I once wrote an article about the concept of truth in science and truth in religion and truth in philosophy. So once these results, whether they are facts, measurements, observations, or calculations, or theories, or new paradigms, evolution is a whole paradigm, it's a whole theory, but theory doesn't mean hypothesis or doesn't mean somebody's idea, then it becomes incumbent on Muslims and non-Muslims to accept them, because we're talking about the world, independent of anybody. So if the world is like this, and people have confirmed that, yes, this is how the world is, this is how it functions, then we have to accept it. So we have to accept modern science in all its rigorous methodology and results. By results, I mean established, correct, confirmed results. Now, for those of us who are believers, Muslims or other non-Muslim believers in the divine, in spirit, capital S, in whatever you believe in, you can add an optional, and I underscore, optional, theistic, interpretative, mental. In other words, the core of modern science, which is all this methodology, all the results, all the confirmed facts and theories and so on, are a common denominator for everybody. Believers, non-believers, Muslim, non-Muslim, doesn't matter. And then those of us who believe can add to that an interpretation which can be theistic, and then I am not in conflict with any scientist. They cannot tell me, why do you think that there is a divine providence that supervises the whole world? And I say, but how is that in conflict with any of the scientific results that you and I have been discussing at the latest conference, or the paper that you wrote and that I quoted in my paper or something? As long as we do not clash on whatever is agreed upon universally, then how I interpret this is completely open and free. And this can open, of course, the field to atheistic interpretations as to theistic interpretations. But here I'm proposing to Muslims that they can feel free to add a theistic interpretation or interpretative mental to all of this scientific knowledge. Then, in partial or to some extent agreement with Ziya Sardar and the Ijmali group, I propose to universally impose stringent ethical standards like those of Islam. So they don't have to be those of Islam, not necessarily what Ziya Sardar and the Ijmali said, but I believe that we can and we should strive to construct universal common ethical standards that we all abide with, and that we integrate them in the pursuit of science. That science doesn't become just, oh, I'm doing my science, let somebody else worry about the ethical implications. 4, and now more specifically to Muslims, accept the Quran's moral guidance and philosophy of knowledge. Make hermeneutics obligatory each time there is any apparent contradiction with modern science. So some people will come and say, what about this verse? And this verse clashes and says the opposite to what you scientists are saying. And in such cases, if there is an apparent contradiction, and this is not me speaking, this has been said by dozens of scholars going back all the way to Ibn al-Ghazali, and on one of the rare agreements, al-Ghazali and Ibn Rus said, both of them said exactly the same thing, that whenever there is any apparent contradiction with something that we are highly confident of being true, then we reinterpret the text, we do hermeneutics. Keep in mind the multi-level meanings inherent in the Quran. This is another idea that is not always very widely appreciated, but I found it with some scholars, and I firmly believe that the Quran lends itself to various levels of reading and comprehension, depending on one's intellect, one's culture and education, one's era, and so on, when reading the verses dealing with natural phenomena. So some people will read some verses and say, you see, these verses, to me, they are really indicative of galaxies and stuff. I say, well, we need to agree first that the word galaxy or the idea of galaxy is not clearly stated here. Okay, we agree. But to you, reading in the second level, deeper level, you understand that this talk of universes or worlds out there, and look at the glory of this, the heavens and stuff, and to you this is referring to galaxies. I say perfectly fine. That's a different reading, and I fully accept that there may be all kinds of multiple readings to the Quran, particularly and including verses that refer to natural phenomena when we talk about cosmology, or we talk about the human life, or even life in general, biological life, and so on. New issues now that are beginning to reignite these debates, because you may have noticed that among the topics that I mentioned sorry, not the topics, among the reactions and schools of thought that I mentioned earlier as reactions to modern science. Once Muslim scholars started to really understand what modern science was about, then we started to see those reactions, some of them in support of this universalist modern science, such as Abdus Salam, and some others strongly antagonistic to it. And then in the late 20th century, early 21st century, we started to have this i'jaz idea. But then now in the last maybe 10 years, 15 years, we have started to see some new topics emerge and reignite the debates as to how do we now reconcile, again, Islam, the Quran, this new modern science. And I just want to mention some of the topics because they are just beginning to really, there are a number of articles and sometimes a few books that have been discussing this, some more than others. So on consciousness and free will, you will not find that much, but it is beginning to be discussed. Genetic engineering and synthetic biology, I think this is the big topic. Genetic engineering has been in discussion, and there are a number of articles on Islam and cloning and Islam and genetic engineering and Islam and this and that. But synthetic biology, which is now beginning to really revolutionize biology and is going to be problematic to some extent, I don't think there are many articles on how Islam relates or addresses synthetic biology and what are the views on this. But I'm absolutely confident that this is going to come very soon. Artificial intelligence, there's only a few, to my knowledge, articles that have appeared in the last few years on Islam and artificial intelligence, but that's not going to continue. For sure, there's going to be a lot of discussion. Enhancement of human bodies and brains, this is what usually people refer to as transhumanism, but it can begin with very small changes. You know, you insert certain pins or certain cells, certain chips into the body, sometimes in the arm, sometimes in the head, and it enhances. And then, of course, the whole question is where do you draw the line between enhancement and complete transformation, or sort of a quantum leap, a jump, and that's another issue. Transsexual issues. Then the transsexual issues, essentially, if we talk about transsexual, is not as actually a new topic. It's an old topic that has reemerged more recently because people recognized, identified for centuries and centuries, for millennia, that there are babies that are born who are intersex, and so they are in between. And so what do you do? And there's a whole discussion in the literature as to, okay, we wait a little bit, or we go for surgery, or we allow this baby to grow a little bit, and then we change. Sometimes there is a definite need we start to realize that, oh, sorry, this is not a boy, this is a girl, so let's do some surgery. So transsexual issues have existed for a long time. What has been new now is two things on this. One is there is now medical technology that can give us some more information. So we can do DNA analysis, we can do chromosome analysis and see what is this baby. And sometimes we find that there are complications in the chromosomes. It's XXY instead of just XX or XY, things like that. And so it tells you that there is a sort of genetic problem here. So the medical technology now has brought some science into the debates. And number two, that now, at least in the West, there's discussion about gender and not just sex. So what about people who have the bodies of, let's say, a man? You can see the sexual organs and so on, but they feel, or they will tell you that they feel completely female. So what do? Do you allow them to change sex? In the West, yes. In the West, there's more and more now people say, yeah, well, whatever you feel, it's your gender that dominates. But in the Islamic literature and the Islamic situation, that is not quite acceptable. So how this is going to play out is going to be very interesting, because we're beginning to see, even in the Arab Muslim world, many people who want to change sex, even though morphologically, biologically, there are no issues. There are no obvious issues. and so forth. So there's a whole number of things like this. So I want to conclude just by 2 quick slides. First, to connect a little bit to the field of education and the pedagogy. So how do we teach these topics or approach or talk to students at different levels in such a way that they really understand and appreciate these topics and not, come into the world with some education degrees, but really lost on these topics. First of all, I think it is important to teach history and philosophy of science. That's the minimum. And it is always shocking to me how little history and philosophy of science is taught in most ministerial, public, or even private curricula. So sometimes there has now developed in the last few decades something called STS, Science, Technology, and Society. But even that is not quite clearly, tends to be, okay, so how do we apply, how do we make science and technology to the benefit of society and things like that? But it's not really, how do we understand this scientific knowledge and the methodology? I tell people philosophy of science doesn't have to be something complicated. It can be just principles of, correlation and causation and things like that. And history of science is extraordinarily rich and wonderful to make people understand what we knew and what we know now, or when did we come to know what we now know, and why did that change happen? Why did we only begin to understand gravity in the 17th century and things like that? It is important to insist on rigorous methodology and objectivity in trying to reach any result or conclusion. I think this should be a sacred principle that should be taught to all students at all levels in any field. This should apply to science, this should apply to even religion, should apply to anything. Your methodology of obtaining knowledge should be as rigorous as possible and as objective as possible. And insist that modern science is not inherently materialistic or atheistic, as is often claimed. Even naturalism, by naturalism I mean methodological naturalism, was adopted by great scholars and scientists of the Golden Age, such as Ibn al-Haytham, such as Biruni, and others. And that's where the history of science becomes very useful, because it not only tells people who did what, but how did they do what they did? And then they start to realize that, oh, I see. So they were thoroughly scientific. They were really applying these naturalistic ideas, even though they didn't call them methodological naturalism at that time. Last thing I want to show you is this new series of booklets, which is just going to start appearing. Cambridge University Press has these series of booklets in different topics called Cambridge Elements. There are booklets of maybe 40, 50 pages on a whole field. So with my friend and collaborator, Stefano Biliardi, we were invited by Cambridge University Press to supervise or be the series editors for these new elements series in what will be called Islam and the Sciences, plural. And so the very first booklet will be one that the two of us have just finished writing. Not just finished writing, it has just now been finished being reviewed and approved and so on, and is now in production phase and should be out in maybe a couple of months. But there will be many other titles in this series. So if you want something that is short and up to date, state of the art of knowledge on one topic or another, and it won't be as general as this one, Islam and Science, Past, Present, and Future Debates. Many of them will be on many other topics, including artificial intelligence and including astronomy and biology and medicine and things like that. So that's, I think I've spoken long enough, and I'm grateful for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer and discuss any items or any ideas of yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Now, our audience has the opportunity to ask either their question orally or put into the chat, and I will read out the question. Please now feel free to ask questions. You do not have to ask questions. Feel free to comment.
Okay, thank you very much for a really very interesting presentation. I am very happy to hear from you first time. I have one question, Shanol. May I ask you?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Professor Kasumi, if we say Islam and science, I wonder if that is really fair to look for our understanding of science in the Quran, which arose outside of religion, perhaps even in spite of religion. At the center of religion, I think, are much more the feeling in Arabic language, qalb, in the language of Quran, qalb, here. However, if we understand theology as religion, then I have other problem, whether we may understand theology as religion. You know, in my understanding, theology is not the religion. Theology is some interpretation of God. Because of that, Islam and science, it is little bit, I have the feeling it is not fair to look for the science in the context of Quran. I don't know, what do you think about it?
Thank you very much for your comments and your questions. On the first issue on whether it is fair to look for science in the Quran, I completely agree with you. I said this new phenomenon of scientific i'jaz, this claim that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of facts, scientific facts and discoveries that one can find in the Quran by dissecting one verse or another, or relating this verse and this verse, saying this one says 30 and this one says 27, and if you multiply and divide and this, and look what number you can come up with, and things like that. And I said I've written a chapter in at least that book that I've referred to. I've written in many other places, but at least in that book I had a systematic dissection of that whole approach, trying to show that this is conceptually wrong, this is methodologically wrong, this is factually wrong. There are so many issues, but the problem is it is very popular, and so we have no choice but to address it. Not because it has merit in itself, but because it is so popular. I have lost count of how many highly educated people believe in this. In fact, I can tell you, and you may be shocked, that there are many schools, curricula, universities where this is taught in courses, these scientific facts in the Quran and in the Sunnah. So I try to rebut all of this. I try to criticize it, systematically, objectively, and so on, but it is out there and we have to address it. Now, the question of theology is very interesting. So theology is all the ideas that one believes in. So it's sort of the dogmas, the creeds. So is God one? And if one, what are his attributes? Does he act in the world, or does he just supervise? Is he, where is he? Is he everywhere, or is he only in our spirits? What does it mean that he creates? Does he continue to create, or he created, at the beginning and then he's no longer creating? So there's all kinds of issues like this. And then, of course, when you get science to start to tell you that the universe has a finite age, that the universe has evolved, that the Earth and the solar system did not always exist. In fact, it has existed only for the last 1/3 of the history of the universe, and humanity has only existed as humanity for the last very fraction of time compared to the 13.8 billion years of the universe time, or the 4.56 billion years of the Earth's life. So you start to, at least from the religious standpoint, you start to think, okay, so what is the place of humanity? What does it mean when the Quran, for example, says God created the heavens and the earth? But wait a minute, the earth was only created like, 2/3 into time later. So for 2/3 of the time, there was no earth. So God created the heavens and then created the earth later, or what does it mean? So science brings, and I'm not even getting into the whole evolution idea. So what does it mean that God created humans if humans evolved from earlier species and it took millions of years for us to become, these sapiens that we are today, intelligent, presumably, we have some consciousness, and what is this consciousness that we have, and so on and so forth. So science brings all kinds of new knowledge and with it new questions that interface, or at least resonate with the theological or religious knowledge in Islam, in Christianity, in Buddhism, in whatever. And so we cannot just disconnect the two. I mean, of course, theology is a field in itself, but science is going to come and disturb this theology by posing some questions and adding sort of new ideas in there. So that's my take. It's not that I want to mix apples and oranges, but that sometimes you have no choice because some ideas are going to interfere with some ideas.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your kind answer.
Thank you very much. The second question is from Lutfi Rahman. Please, it is your turn.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jagti. Professor Ghosn, let me back to the definition of al-ilm. For example, from Al-Ghazali, he said that ma'rifatul shay' ala ma huwa bi, knowing thing as it is. So if I refer to the view of Gadamer, for example, that everyone has their own horizon in dealing with interpretation, for example, in relation to what they have in mind. For example, when you said about Nasr, he is a perennialist, he is also spiritualist, since his horizons basically comes from his circumstance that deals with very harsh modernity, dry spirituality because of secularism in the United States. So I would say that it means that science will always be relatively dialectical. So there will be no fixed or even established definition of what so-called science. I would like to have your comments on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just to pick up on not to pick up on Nasr himself, but to take that as a springboard. So what you described about Sayyid Hussein Nasr, which is absolutely true. He's a perennialist, a spiritualist. I think I mentioned or referred to him as a neo-traditionalist, a Sufi master, and so on. None of this has anything to do with science, you see? So the fact that he has his own horizon, the fact that he has his own background, and yes, he witnessed hard secularism and so on, and he reacted, and he wanted to defend spirituality, and he feels that spirituality is an integral part of our existence and worldview, and even the rest of the world around us is infused with spirit, and so on. All of this is his point of view. This is not science. This is his philosophy, his theology, his dogma, his creed. Okay, we call it whatever we call it. I have no problem. That is completely subjective and completely personal. He's free. But science is not the same. Science is not the same thing. There is nothing that Sayyid Hussein Nasr can bring and pose on the table and claim to be scientific. And then he says, and then if we say, what is the evidence for this? And he says, this is my view. This is my personal approach. And we say, no, in science, there is no personal view. In philosophy, yes, there is. In theology, yes, there is. In spirituality, yes, there is. You can have all the views you want, but you cannot claim to be scientific if you make it subjective, if you make it my view and my horizon. That is not what happens. This is why I said, there is very important characteristics of modern science that we need to appreciate, and I said toward the end to also adopt. And I said that is falsifiability, repeatability, which leads to objectivity and universality. Only when scientific facts, knowledge, theories, calculations, results, new paradigms, whatever, achieve this kind of objective level of it has been confirmed, it has been repeated, it has been falsified, etc., then it is part and parcel of the scientific knowledge. Until I tell my students something very simple. I say, because I teach astronomy and astrophysics in addition to physics and all of that, and I say, no discovery, because every week we hear something has been discovered, the astronomers, and I tell the students, in astronomy, you are lucky because every week you're going to hear something new, some new event or some new discovery or some new phenomenon or something. But I warn them, I say, no discovery is a true accepted discovery until it has been made by others. So I have made a discovery. No, sorry, you haven't made a discovery. You have made an observation that you have now brought to the scientific community. When others, 2, 3 people from different positions and places, different circumstances, different techniques, so they are not repeating the same, possibly the same mistake that I'm making. They are not subjected to the same biases, and they find the same result, and it is confirmed 2, 3, 4 times, then we say this is scientific knowledge. So once we have that, there is no longer, you know, somebody's horizon, because I observed something from my horizon, and then somebody from Japan did the same observation and got the same result from their horizon. I'm not, you know, I don't mean literally horizon, but I mean metaphorically. And then somebody else with a different equipment, with a different mindset, with a different perhaps inclination, maybe that person wanted to prove that my observation is wrong because it clashes with their own theory. And if they are fair and proper and they do the observation and find the result to be true, they will say, we are reporting a positive observation. So I don't know if I talk too much. I tend to go on for a long time. But I just wanted to distinguish this idea of, you know, one's horizon, which is, yes, in philosophy, yes, in religion, in spirituality, in theology, etc. All that's correct, yes. But in science, no, it's a different situation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and for your reaction. The next question is from Dr. Areti. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I have a question. Can we ask people to make research and then stay in faith, or the opposite? First to believe in God and then make research regarding with faith? What is your answer to this question?
But then what is the search? Searching for what exactly?
Dr. Areti, you can ask your question if you want orally. Are you here? Okay, I try to read out again.
We can see her, but we cannot hear.
Dr. Areti, are you here? Can you ask your question, please? Is this possible? Okay, I repeat again the question.
Yeah.
Can we ask people to make research and then stay in faith, or the opposite? First, can you hear me? No. We can't hear you. Okay. First to believe in God and then make research regarding his faith.
So I tell people, you can search for anything you want, and you can start with any hypothesis you want. That is science. Nobody tells you you need to start here and you need to adopt this hypothesis and you have to adopt this. You do whatever you want. So pose a question to yourself and say, I'm going to pursue it. Mm-hmm. Pursue it now in a systematic, rigorous, objective manner that needs to be falsifiable. So achieve any result, bring it to me and say, okay, here's my result. And I say, how do I check that this is true or not? And you say, if you go and observe this, if you go and do this measurement, this experiment, etc., you should be finding this because my explanation for this phenomenon or my result has the following implications. So I go and check the implications. Now, whether those implications, whether the question you were asking is trying to help you to believe or confirm your belief or not confirm your belief, That is completely up to you. You do whatever you like. Now, two things we need to be aware of and be careful about. The questions that natural science asks and is able to address are questions that have to do with natural phenomena. So if you come, for example, and you say, I want to really search for angels. And I say, what are angels? You say, there are some spiritual beings. I say, well, that's not natural science, because you have to mention, or you have to define some natural phenomenon, and then we will try to figure out what is the best way to investigate this natural phenomenon. But if you start with a phenomenon that is not natural to begin with, then I say, sorry, this is not part of natural science. Then, go address it in theology, go address it in philosophy, address it in art, whatever you like, but that's not going to be a good question, a proper question to address in natural science. Now, you can sit and think and come up with ideas why angels exist or don't exist, but that's not part of science. So you can confirm to yourself your beliefs, you can strengthen your belief, you can look at the world and be impressed that, yes, there is a God because I can see some signs or whatever, but that is not this is not part and parcel of the science itself. The science is, oh, let me go and measure the size of this universe. Let me go and measure, how many galaxies there are out there. And then I say, look at this, trillions of galaxies. Oh my God, every galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars and planets. And that can only be the result of God having created all of this. So the part where you're measuring the galaxies and the stars and the planets, that's proper science, because that's part of your natural phenomenon, natural world. But then when you start discussing, oh, there must be a God because he created, or there are some spirits or some angels because now I feel much better and I prayed yesterday or this morning or whatever, that is not part of the science. So we just need to make sure that we do not, mesh the things together where we are addressing scientific questions with the scientific methodology, and then all of a sudden we jump to religious, spiritual, theological questions or topics.
Thank you very much. I see our student Fariza has also a question. Please, Fariza, it is your turn.
I would like to thank you for this very thought-provoking presentation. And I have the following question. You mentioned that the Ijaza theory, if you want to call it like that, is also believed by very educated people. And I wanted to ask, how do you deal then with people like that? Or what reactions did you got, for example, from publishing your book or from discussions with people who are strong believers in the Ijaza theory? So how do you deal with people like that? That would be my question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm glad you liked my presentation, and I'm glad you're sympathizing with my plight. Because I do indeed get a lot of flack when I criticize Ijaz. I did it in Islamic conferences a couple of times, and people were just up in arms. They were like, "Wow, how can you say something like this?" Because in their minds, if you say there is no science, no modern science in the Quran, there is guidance, there is encouragement to reflect and even to explore and look at the heavens and go, roam the earth and listen and observe. There are all kinds of verses that tell people to think and reflect and observe and explore and contemplate and this and that. But that is not science. That is not science. There are hundreds, I think, if I remember correctly, something like 300 verses that mention the heavens, the sky, and the universe and the cosmos. But even if there were 3,000 verses or 3 million verses, that doesn't mean there is science in there. And I say this as a Muslim, as a practicing Muslim, and as an astronomer and astrophysicist. There is no astronomical knowledge in the Quran, because it is not the point of the Quran to bring astronomical or scientific. What is the difference? The difference is there's a huge difference if I come to people and I say, Can you see how these stars and planets and the moon are beautiful? Look at how they move and look at the different, can you see that these stars have different colors? And look how Venus is wonderful and Jupiter and this and that. That is not science. This is not science. I'm just telling people to, enjoy and appreciate and look at the beauty and look at all these phenomena and how the water, freezes and then makes little crystals and all of that. That is not science. I'm just describing nature. I'm just describing this beautiful world that is around us, but that is not science. That is at most an encouragement to reflect, an encouragement to try to understand, why does the water do this? When the temperature drops or when the temperature rises, we start to have water vapor, and then it's difficult to breathe because there's too much humidity and all of that. All of this is good encouragement, and it's wonderful. And the Quran encourages people, and I said at the beginning, says, go seek knowledge, and those who have knowledge and those who do not are not equal in the eyes of God, and those and this and that. But science is really being able to explain phenomena, not just to describe or to show things that are beautiful. So I try to explain to people, and then I tell them, look, if you really believe that there is all kinds of scientific knowledge in the Quran, can you explain to me why the cell, which is the primary, most important building block of biology, is not mentioned in the Quran? How? I mean, God only mentions like the mountains and the moon and the sun. Why doesn't he mention the cells? Why isn't he mentioning the galaxies? Why is there nowhere something clear? There are verses and words that refer to the planets, that refer to the stars, that refer to the sun and to the moon, but there is nowhere the galaxies. And all kinds of fundamental ideas of science that are nowhere to be found in the Quran. Why? Because the Quran doesn't care about it. This is not an encyclopedia of science. It's not just going to give me, chapter 3 is biology and chapter 4 is geology, and now I'm going to explain to you this and that. It is not. It is a moral and theological spiritual guidance. It tells you there is a God. If you want to believe, if you are convinced that there is a God, okay, then here's the attributes of God. Here's why you need to refer and to connect with God. And then your life is going to be limited. You're going to have to live an ethical life. You're going to have to relate to the world, meaning people and the environment, in a proper way. And that's it. And that's what the Quran and religion and Islam is. It's a theology. There is one God, and we need to connect with him. And then there is an ethic and a moral message, and that's it. But how the stars explode or don't explode, or why there is a supernova or there is no supernova, why would I care? And so people come to me and say, that there are verses that mention the black holes in the Quran. And I said, do you really believe that God, cares so much about black holes that he's going to tell people throughout all these centuries, look, you should really think about the black holes? You really believe? By the way, the closest black hole was just discovered last week, and it is more than 1,000 light years away. So why would I care about black holes? Why would it be mentioned in the Quran? So this is the kind of conversation I have with people. It's a difficult conversation, especially with educated people. But then slowly they start to realize that they just accepted some ideas because they sounded impressive. It's really impressive if you are told that the Quran contains, that you can calculate the speed of light from the Quran. I mean, I remember when somebody came and told me, I said, are you serious? And he said, yes, I'll bring you the paper, you will read. And then, sometime later, I relate the story in my book. Sometime later, I go and then I read this paper, which is 10 pages long, written by a physicist, by an Egyptian physicist. And I'm like, I can't believe this. You really believe that the Quran really has, some verses where you can combine them and you get the speed of light? What do you think this message of the Quran is really? What is the speed of light? How to calculate it? So when people start to see that there are some inconsistencies or some crazy ideas here inherent to this i'jaz. And by the way, I tell people, I say, do you know when this i'jaz started? This whole scientific i'jaz phenomenon, which now is ubiquitous. It's now everywhere. It's like you cannot talk to any Muslim scholars out there, and they will mention this i'jaz because they are so convinced that this is such a great aspect of Islam and the Quran that for them it's like i'jaz, and it is taught in schools and universities, and some are supervising PhD thesis on all of this and so on. So I tell them, do you know when this i'jaz started? Because I went back and did the whole, backtracking into history. When did we start really? When did some Muslim scholars start to write stuff like this? And it's toward the end of the 19th century. So for the entire Islamic civilization, when we had all the great scientists, including those that I mentioned in passing, Ibn al-Haytham and al-Biruni and Ibn Sina and al-Battani and Ibn Yunus and all of them, Ibn Baytar, none of them, not a single one, pointed to the Quran and said, you see these verses, they contain some scientific knowledge. So all of that 1,000-year history of civilization, nobody did this. But then toward the end of the 19th century, all of a sudden this became like, part and parcel of the Islamic creed. And if somebody like me says this is wrong and false, then I start to get criticized. But part of life.
Thank you for the answer, and thanks for still doing it, even though I'm being criticized.
Yeah, dear Gassum, I have a question, maybe the last question. In your opinion, what causes the decline of science in the Islamic world? We are very proud of the golden age. What is your opinion?
Yeah, thank you. So that question deserves a whole seminar, although I am not a historian, so I wouldn't be able to do that seminar properly. But I have read quite a bit on this. I have my views. There's quite a variety of opinions on this. My simple opinion is the world changed. It's not that, well, there were certain factors that made the Islamic civilization decline a little bit. First of all, the decline was not uniform in all the fields. In some fields, some sciences continued well into the 17th century, sometimes 18th century. And in some fields, it's like there's no more production. You can see from the manuscripts that we have and what people were doing in astronomy, in medicine, in chemistry, in some various fields, pharmacology, etc., which ones continued to progress and which ones did not continue to progress over different centuries. But what happened, I think the scientific revolution in Europe, not just the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the age of knowledge in Europe, with the age of discovery of the Americas, the new wealth, new monies, new societies, knowledge societies such as the Royal Society in London and others, Europe started to take off, just started to take off. New big universities, new big guilds of knowledge, the Royal Society, new money into the inventions, into the development, new buildings, new teaching, etc. Whereas the Muslim world remained in sort of the old ways, and then the gap became bigger and bigger and bigger until of course, even militarily, industrially, Europe was so advanced that it was so easy to just colonize the Muslim world. And that's when everybody sort of woke up and realized that, hey, we used to think that these guys who are way behind and they are, medieval barbarians, and now they are controlling us completely because they have all this knowledge and all this technology, all these weapons, all these tools. But essentially, it is the development that happened elsewhere with new universities, new institutions, even institutions of economic development, wealth, industry, etc., developed somewhat quickly over a century or two in Europe, whereas in the Muslim world, we remained in the old ways. We did not even adopt the printing press. We did not adopt the steam engine. New technologies that were appearing, we did not adopt them. And a century later, we realized that, hey, we are way behind. So in a nutshell, that's my view, that how all of a sudden we found ourselves, completely behind the developed world.
Thank you very much. I see Ibrahim has a question, our colleague from the US. Ibrahim, please.
Sound, you're on mute.
Ibrahim, switch on your microphone, please.
Yeah, now do
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your insightful talk. My question is about the i'jaz you mentioned. I mean, how do you explain the Quran, or the Islamic scholars explain, for example, the Quran as itself as an i'jaz?
What kind
I mean,
of i'jaz? The Muslim scholars say
I
what?
mean, yeah, I mean that the Quran as itself is an i'jaz, how do you explain it?
How do I explain? Well, I mentioned earlier that we used to have this idea of i'jaz, which I defined as miraculousness, something that is so extraordinary that it can only be explained as a miracle, as an act of God, a direct act of God. So this is what the meaning of i'jaz comes from, mu'jiza, a'jaza, which is miracle. And we used to have for many centuries in the Islamic culture and civilization something called i'jaz bayani. This i'jaz bayani means textual, linguistic, and the claim was, and there are books and books written on this, that if you read the verses and you analyze them textually and linguistically, it is completely different in form and in structure to the old poetry and to the old prose and this and that, and nobody could have written something like this. It was, just a burst and, something unseen before and unheard of, and no human could write something. But this is completely subjective. I mean, yeah, so you read something and you say, this is extraordinary. Nobody could have written this. Yeah, but that was the i'jaz that was propagated for a long time. What was the evidence, the proof that the Quran is of divine origin? It was two things. One, this text itself, and two, the life of the Prophet. People said, if you look at this, this is a human being, but he does not behave like a human being. He is so extraordinary. He's so perfect. He does wonderful things. He has, he was just like an alien, like an ET that descended into Mecca. Like, he was completely different, and he had such high morals and high ways of dealing with people. So they say his way of life, his dealing with people, his way of speaking, etc., was proof that this is a special guy. He's been selected by God. He's been nurtured by God. He's receiving revelation all the time for the last 23 years of his life, and so on and so forth. But then, as I said, that we started to have new types of i'jaz. People maybe felt that, okay, so what do we do with people who don't read Arabic to begin with? So they can't appreciate this i'jaz bayani, this textual i'jaz, this extraordinary form of the Quran. And then those who do not have a high appreciation of the Arabic itself, which nowadays, like 99.9% of the Arabs themselves, the education system is so bad, and they have lost the Arabic language mostly, or at least the classical high-level Arabic language, that if you show them the Quran, they would if you don't tell them this is Quran and you show them another text, they wouldn't be able to tell that this is Quran and this is not. So people try to find new ways to convince people of the divine origin of the Quran. So they came up with, before this i'jaz ilmi, this scientific i'jaz, they came up with historical i'jaz. So they say, if you read the stories that are told in the Quran, you will find that nobody knew those stories. But now we know that these stories happened indeed in history before Muhammad, because we have found now archaeological evidence, etc. And so how would he know these stories when he never traveled to Asia or whatever? And they are in the Quran. So that's a historical i'jaz. So we started to have sort of new, more objective, more material types of i'jaz. And then even after i'jaz ilmi, the scientific i'jaz, we started to have a new form of i'jaz known as i'jaz adadi. This is numerical i'jaz. So people came up with all kinds of claims that if you take this chapter and that chapter and you count how many times this word appears here and it appears here and you multiply and divide and stuff, then you find that there are some extraordinary. This is like the famous Bible code, for those of you who know, a little bit of the Judeo-Christian culture. So there's some kind of a numerical algorithm or some extraordinary coincidences or relations that you can find if you just count this and divide this and multiply and this and that. Why? Because people are always in need of, can you prove to me? And I tell people, listen, this is faith. This is you believe. You can convince yourself. You can have some reasons. If I say, why do you believe in this? You say, I believe because. It's not like I believe, that's it. Okay, I believe. Don't ask me. People don't believe just out of the blue like this. They believe because they convince themselves of something. But there is never any hard evidence. It's not like show me the proof. That's science. Science is show me the evidence, and I need to be able to make the measurement and the calculations myself. But in faith, it's like you have some valid reasons why you believe this, or you have some coherence in your mind as to why you believe this and you don't believe this. And yeah, fine. That's faith. Faith is some belief that is based on some personal justification, and that's it. So, but people now started to, I need more evidence, I need more justification, I need to believe, I need to prove to myself that this Quran is really divine. And I say, you read it. If you're convinced with it, good for you. If you're not convinced with it, then nothing will convince you. That's it.
Thank you. I think so too. I mean, religion is faith, and I don't know if it is just if you wanted to have it just scientific, it would be hard. I mean, to prove all the faith, all the faith. I mean, it's gonna be hard to
science.
Prove it.
Science cannot prove certain dogmas or beliefs. Science cannot prove to you that there is a God, and cannot prove that there is no God. So that's not the purpose of science. That's not the objective of science. So let's not ask of science to prove to me certain things that I want to believe. Science cannot prove to me that the Quran was revealed by the divine or was written by a human being. Either way, it cannot. But the science cannot and does not want to get into, do you believe in spirit? What is spirit? Small s, capital S. That's not for science. So we, those who believe, need to understand that we cannot ask of science to prove anything that is not part and parcel of the science. Whatever is in the science, yes, ask me, I will tell you. What is not part of the science, don't even ask me.
I think there's also, the standing of theology. Where we have theology as a science, but I think it's another discussion then, or it would be a far more discussion than we have now.
Yeah, theology is a different field. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have some questions. I see Rashid has also a question. Rashid, please.
Yes. Good evening. I don't know where are you now, because I thank you for your presentation, like the other colleagues. Would you like to ask a personal question, if it's possible? May I ask?
Well, asking is one thing, answering is something else.
It is about religion. It is about your religion. So how is your religion's position, and how do you find now the currently Islamic world, and what is to be changed in the Islamic world? What are you thinking? That we reach the level of the currently European level, yeah. That the Muslim people reach the level of European people. Do you understand?
I think I understand. I'm not sure. So I think there were two questions, if I got that right. One is, what is my personal stand on religion? And the other was, when will can Muslims or will Muslims reach the level of development of Europeans? Which I think is a very fuzzy question, because what do we mean by level of development? Is it more technological development, more economic advancement, more military? Is it intellectual? Is it cultural? Is it, in some ways, if you ask people around me here, and by the way, I am in the United Arab Emirates. I am Algerian, but I live in the Emirates and work here. But if you ask people around here, they will say morally, we are superior. So why do you want me to reach down to the Europeans? So if you ask people, they will say, no, I don't want to reach the Europeans. The Europeans are in a big mess, culturally and morally and so on. So that second question is very difficult to address. So in what ways do we need to develop? What are the areas that require development? Is it educational? Is it political? Is it social? There's all kinds of issues, and that would take a long time. As to the other question, what is my position on religion? Well, that too could take a long time, because I am usually referred to as a rationalist and as a liberal Muslim. So combine that as you will and understand it if you can. But yeah, so I am a believer. Everybody knows, anyone who has read my writings and my books. But I certainly uphold science. I uphold reason. I am open, tolerant. That's why people refer to me as liberal. There are all kinds of dogmas that I don't believe in, that I do not accept. So I essentially sort of, make my I try to make my mind coherent. I think that's the objective. I try not to go schizophrenic, not, I do something in the day and something in the evening, and then I have two different minds. I try to reconcile in my mind everything that sort of fits together. And it's not easy. I mean, it takes some thinking and some reading and reflection, and writing also helps. When you write, you understand better. But I think I have found some kind of a balance between being a believer, at the same time not believing all kinds of nonsense, but at the same time being a rational scientist. I try to be scientist, proper scientist, 100%.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is for me, it's enough to know how are you thinking, because yeah, it was very important for me, because it is a point from that I can make a view for me. Thank you very much. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rashid, for your question. We have of course, Halil has a question. Halil, please, Mr. Halil. Maybe I'm seeing.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, please.
Brother Nidal, thanks so much for your answer. Well answered. I don't know differences between West and East. I lived almost all my adult life in West. So I have a question. In your presentation, I came late, unfortunately. Time differences between United States and Europe. I miscalculated. I have a question. Differences, when we say Islam and science, is it any differences between Islam and science and Christianity, Islam and science and Judaism, or all the faith-based approach to the science will be approximately the same? I'm sure you spent time on it, and you probably investigated that as well, sir. Thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you for your question. So at the beginning, perhaps the part that you missed is not exactly what you are asking for, but it can help a little bit, because I started by explaining that the term for science that is used nowadays in Arabic/Islamic literature is ilm, even though ilm originally, both in the Quran and the Islamic literature for centuries and centuries, was substantially different from the concept of science of today. And so then I focused on, so what kind of science are we talking about now? And I defined modern science, as we were talking about modern science, which has this principles and methodology and some of the results and paradigms and theories that it has come up with. And most importantly, that this modern science is naturalistic, one, and two, it tries to be universal. So we don't have a Chinese physics, and then we have American physics, and we don't have Indian space science, and then we have European space science. We don't. So it's all common. So in that sense, when I say in the lecture Islam and science, the science is supposed to be universal. So that's science. Now, when I talk about Islam and science, at some point I said, this modern science raises issues and poses serious problems, not problems, questions at least, to the religious traditions. So I am looking at Islam and how does it relate to Islam, but some of those issues that modern science raises also apply not just to Islam, apply to Christianity and to other religions, although different religions have different theologies. Are we talking about only one God creator? Or are we talking about like Confucianism, for example, which doesn't have a God creator? Buddhism doesn't have a God creator, but it has spirits, it has spirituality. So there are different religions that have different characteristics and different theologies. And so how they relate to this modern science, which is supposed to be common to everybody, that can vary. That can vary. So some issues are addressed to essentially all religions. Anything you believe, and I always tell people, the one common denominator to all religions, even those that are not theistic, is the spirit, the concept of spirit. So Buddhism, Confucianism, Hinduism, you name it, they may have a god, several gods, no god, but they all have spirit or spirits. So to make a long story short, modern science is supposed to be universal and one common, and then different religions can have different characteristics, and how they relate to modern science can have some common issues and some issues that are proper to each religion.
Thank you, sir. May Allah bless you.
Mm-hmm. I see the desire to ask question is great. Bashaya has a question, my student. Please, Bashaya.
Hello, it's actually Fiza, but I'm using Bashar's computer. I wanted to ask, so in your opinion, so you're saying that faith cannot be proven with science and science cannot be proven with faith, and you should keep that separated. Or did I misunderstand you?
I said faith is a number of ideas that you believe in, and that depending on your religion, religiosity, whether you're, again, conservative, liberal, whatever. And those ideas or dogmas or creeds that you believe in, usually people try to justify for themselves. That if you ask them, why do you believe? They will tell you, I believe because 1, 2, 3. Which means that for them, there are reasons for believing. It's not just completely irrational. I just believe, leave me alone. But now, those things that are most convincing to you on the basis of which you believe can be sometimes provable or at least justifiable, and sometimes you cannot. So, for example, if you ask somebody and you say, why do you believe? And you say, because the world is so extraordinary. I mean, look at all these laws of the universe and how the universe has evolved, and all these cosmic relations and, you know, anthropic principle and this and that. So for me, there is no way that this can have come out just out of nothing and by chance and coincidences, and it has made all of this. I say, but so if you ask that person, but can you prove that there are these relations, cosmic, etc.? They will say yes. Science can prove that there are some relations in the cosmos that are extraordinary, etc. But then you say, but that is not necessarily equal to believing in God or whatever. But for that person, this is provable by science, and that to me is fully convincing, which means I have proven to myself that God exists. So that's how it goes. So in principle, no, you cannot prove dogmas or creeds or religious faith. You cannot prove it, but you can justify and strengthen it for yourself depending on what you believe and on the basis of what.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, science is objective, but faith is subjective. And using the objective scientific information, you can, for yourself, you can justify why you believe in God or whatever else.
Correct. Yes. So you've put it simply. I mean, there are some fine tuning in there, but yeah. put it like that, I would agree largely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
So the next question is in the chat. Thanks for a very insightful talk. I wonder if you had to give one advice to the Muslim youth who are budding scientists, doctors, and professionals, but are drawn towards atheism and Darwinism to oppose all religions, including Islam. One advice. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, that Darwinism is not synonymous to atheism, and certainly does not need to be. I am definitely not an atheist, and I accept, I was going to say believe, but it's not a belief. I accept and I'm fully convinced of evolution 100%, both for biological organisms and for humans. Now, the advice is, do not let people tell you that science requires materialism, leads to atheism, or is synonymous to atheism, and that there is necessarily a fundamental conflict between the two. There are some adjustments to be made. This is why when I answered the question earlier as to what do I believe and what kind of a person am I, religious to what extent, and I said I'm a rationalist, I'm a liberal Muslim, blah, blah, blah. So there are ways to reconcile all of this, but not all of it. So if you take some of the conservative ideas, many of the conservative ideas, and you try to fit them with what science tells us and what reason tells us, etc., you will have a hard time putting all of that together. So not all of it can just be put together and everything, life is beautiful and fine. But not necessarily conflict either. There is some adjustment to be made between the two. This, I need to adjust a little bit my beliefs, and this, I need to understand science more correctly like this and look at it from this angle, and then they fit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The last question may be from my colleague, Michael. The question, he has the following question. Thanks a lot for the highly delightful presentation. I wonder why you choose Ibn Rushd over Al-Ghazali for the harmonious approach, since the latter lived 150 to 100 years earlier and both had similar methodological approaches as you mentioned. Why exactly did you choose Ibn Rushd?
Because they do not have the same methodology. I'm sorry. So Ibn Rushd, in a nutshell, if Ibn Rushd, I remember when I read his small book, which I consider to be one of the most beautiful books written in the Islamic civilization, the definitive discourse on the harmony between religion and reason, or so it's the title. And those of you who, I don't know, in Arabic, Faslul Maqal, this is the famous Faslul Maqal, very short book, maybe 30 pages or something, but absolutely extraordinary, very simple, beautifully written. I read it in Arabic and French at the time, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. I have understood now. I can really put it all together. Very, very simple. So what is, at the time he was trying to show the harmony and the possible harmonization and reconciliation between philosophy and religion and theology. And so he tried to explain, so what does philosophy actually do? Why is philosophy so valuable and so important? And why, in fact, for the intelligent humans, the highly sophisticated, highly educated people, philosophy is actually a must. So this is what Ibn Rushd is trying to explain. And then he says, now, if you understand the objectives of philosophy, of what we try to explain and what we try to understand and how we think properly, etc., where do you see a clash? There is no clash. And in fact, if you look at what are the objectives of religion, why was there revelation to begin with? What is religion trying to do for humans? And you find that in the end, there is total harmony between the two. And he likens them to two bosom sisters. He says they are two sisters who are taking their milk from the breasts of the same mother in this case, meaning the divine. And so we are receiving this milk, which is wisdom, hikmah, this wisdom from philosophy or from religion, from the same source. And they love each other, they do not hate each other, they do not fight each other, things like this. So this is Ibn Rushd in a nutshell. And then, of course, if you read his books, you realize that he is, implementing a serious, rigorous methodology. He's Aristotelian, but that's a different story. So for me, it was, if we take philosophy from Ibn Rushd and just replace it by science and do the same analysis, then we get into this harmonization. Al-Ghazali was different. Al-Ghazali was very different. Al-Ghazali began by trying to understand philosophy, and he wrote one of the first books, Maqasid al-Falasifa, the objectives of the philosophers, which was the first part, which later he added or enlarged into Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers. So he's beginning with his thesis that there are serious problems with philosophy, and you have to be very careful. There are only some ideas that we can take from philosophers, and they are okay. But many ideas are problematic, and as is famously known, he listed 20 topics, 3 of which he said that the philosophers claim, 3 theses that the philosophers claim, which are actual heresy, kufr. And then the others, 16 or 17, he said, these are bid'ah, these are innovations added that nobody in the Islamic history ever said anything like this. These guys took stuff from the Greeks, from the Hellenic philosophy, and are now trying to Islamize it. So in the end, Al-Ghazali is warning us against philosophy. He's warning us about all kinds of knowledge that is not religious knowledge. And as is well known, just to conclude from his biography, Al-Ghazali in the end went into spiritual crisis, into an intellectual and spiritual crisis. People likened it to Descartes', doubt, the big doubt. How do I know what I know? And Al-Ghazali asked himself, how do I know that what I know is true? Anything that I know, how do I know is true? And in the end, he concluded, only what comes directly from God, I can know for sure is true. And that's why people, largely conclude that he essentially turned Sufi toward the end of his life. So Al-Ghazali is a very different trajectory and a very different thesis and a very different program from Ibn Rushd. I think Ibn Rushd, in his harmonization of philosophy and religion, is much more useful and applicable to us as we try to harmonize science and religion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. This is why I want to thank you for your contribution, dear Professor Nida Al-Qassoum. It was a very interesting and exciting lecture. I think we have learned a lot of new perspectives. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for your efforts. At this point, I also want to thank our audience for participating. Have a nice evening. You are free to leave, and I will then finally close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed the session, enjoyed the conversation and all the discussion. And I congratulate you for this seminar series. And hopefully, inshallah, in the future, we will have more collaboration. Thank you.
Inshallah. نسأل الله عز وجل أن يوفق في أعمالكم.
أجمعين إن شاء الله.
Thank you very much. Yes, you are free to leave, and I will then finally close the meeting, inshallah. I don't hear you. It's not possible. No. I hope you got the answer for your question. Dr. Areti, I can't understand, unfortunately. Okay, have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Dürfen wir die Sitzung verlassen oder bleiben wir noch da?
You can, please. Good
Okay.
evening.
Thank you much. I wish you to.
See you next time. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
السلام عليكم.
Alaikum salam. I think ich kenne
عبد
Sie.
الرحمن السلام عليكم.
Thank you. Good evening, inshallah. Ma salama.
الله يسلمك.
السلام عليكم. أهلا وسهلا فيكم.
Alaikum salam. Ma salama. Hocam.